Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Allison Brown, President of League of Women Voters Falls Church, and I'm joined by Hal Lippman, President of the Civic Association Citizens for a Better City. In this third forum in our series, Affordable Housing in the City of Falls Church, Problems and Prospects, our two organizations are building on the information and ideas that came out of the first two panel discussions. In the first forum at the end of February, the discussion emphasized our city's challenging 40-year history and lack of accomplishment in the area of affordable housing to date. In the next forum at the end of April, the panel focused on what's been happening recently, including a number of extraordinary positive developments that will add more than 60 affordable apartments called ADUs to our inventory and bring into play a multi-million-dollar grant award that will expand affordable homeownership opportunities, as well as preserve certain existing ADUs. With these previous discussions in mind, this afternoon, we turn to the most important question in our forum series: what lies ahead? Clearly, even with the spate of recent developments that I just mentioned, affordable housing in Falls Church remains at a crossroads. The issues facing our community are daunting. For example, how can the city's affordable housing stock be preserved? An incredibly important issue along those lines is the future of the city's largest standalone affordable development, a set of buildings called The Fields, which now include 96 affordable units. Its future is in question because the tax credits that enabled it to survive an earlier transition are scheduled to expire in a few years. Now I'll turn it over to Hal Lippman.
Thanks, Allison. This is our tag team intro. Continuing on, there's the key question of how to create new, and in this time of national reckoning, more racially and economically diverse affordable housing. Until now, the best our city has been able to accomplish has been workforce housing, targeted at teachers, city employees, and others with incomes between 60 and 80% of area median income, which means between $88,000 and $117,000 respectively, which is way more than the vast majority of individuals and or families in our country earn. The question is, how can our tiny city of 2.2 square miles with little developable land and dedicated funding lower area median incomes levels to amounts such as 40 or even 30% that might make it possible for moderate and lower income people of color to live in our community? And lastly, there's the essential underlying question of resources. How does our city obtain the necessary funds to preserve existing apartments and increase the supply of and diversity within the number of new apartments and other types of affordable housing? Hoping to provide some answers to these challenging questions, we brought together a panel of regional and local experts, including a member of the City of Alexandria Housing Affordability Advisory Committee, a senior leader of the nonprofit firm HD Advisors, a senior leader of the nonprofit firm Wesley Housing Development Corporation, the chairman of the City of Falls Church Housing Commission and lifetime resident of the City of Falls Church, and the City of Falls Church's Director of Community Planning and Economic Development Services. We look forward to the panelists' opening comments and the subsequent discussion and Q&A to be moderated once again by our esteemed colleague, Nancy Vincent, Director of the Falls Church City Department of Housing and Human Services. Nancy.
Good afternoon. So the City of Falls Church is a unique jurisdiction whose residents represent the vibrant spectrum of life in Northern Virginia. And I am so excited about the commitment of so many people to invest in the long-term viability of the city. We know that affordable housing matters. It matters because decent, safe housing positively affects the health of the occupants. It matters because being able to afford housing close to where you work reduces transportation needs and reduces the impact of carbon emissions on the environment. It matters because housing boosts children's school achievement, reduces criminal involvement, improves parent and child health, raises employment rates, and reduces mental illness. It matters because what benefits one segment of the community benefits the entire community. So today we have the panel that will bring that long-term view into focus. First off, we have Jim Snyder. Jim has served as Director of Planning and Economic, the Community Planning and Economic Development Services for the City of Falls Church since February of 2011. Jim has used urban planning and economic development skills developed during a long career with Arlington County, where he supervised the county's long range and development planning sections. He played a leadership role in projects as diverse as Pentagon City, Shirlington, Market Common, Westover, the Virginia Square and Clarendon sector plans, and Columbia Pike revitalization. In 2006, the Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association recognized Jim for outstanding leadership by a professional planner. Jim has also served as adjunct professor with Virginia Tech's Alexandria Graduate Planning Program. In 2017, Jim served as chair of the Council of Governments Planning Directors Technical Committee and helped initiate a regional transit-oriented development forum focusing on encouraging development near WMATA stations. Jim graduated from the University of Virginia School of Architecture with a degree in city planning. So Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate it. Hal and the league very much appreciate the chance to be a part of this this panel. As you know, the city is small, but 2.2 square miles was mentioned. We have approximately 14,617 residents, but it's fairly dense. Just giving you an overview of how it's arranged. Most of our land is actually designated for single-family development. We have two simple zoning districts, R1A, which has 11,250 foot lots, R1B, which has 7,500 square foot lots. And we have RM, which is a medium density apartment category that is the underlying zoning for the fields that was mentioned earlier by Hal. We have a number of older garden apartments in the city that are at risk of changing from somewhat market affordable to either redevelopment or being renovated and becoming a lot more expensive. What are the things that control these? Well, the comprehensive plan in Virginia is really an important document that is how cities and counties tell areas what they should become, and they are the designation of densities, uses. There are chapters in the comprehensive plan. Recently, the city redid the housing chapter, for example. We have a number of development areas that have been designated on the comprehensive plan for redevelopment. They're called planning opportunity areas. And those have been the places where most of our new affordable housing has been able to be generated from as a voluntary concession that's part of redevelopment of major projects. So for example, projects like the Lincoln at Tinner Hill or the Harris Teeter project both had residential apartments that are designated for affordable dwellings and have standards for the value or the rent, if you will. The Fields is an interesting project because that was funded federally, and the time frame for that is running out. So redevelopment can be the friend of affordable housing. That's one of the challenges of the city, as they have worked on redeveloping older portions of the city, many of them outmoded commercial areas. The city has used the redevelopment tool to gain additional housing. We're fortunate that the marketplace, in fact, wants a certain amount of housing. The marketplace is supporting new residential housing in the region and nationally. And so this has availed us the opportunity to create those kinds of values. I can talk more in the future about the details of that. Every large project that's coming through the city does typically make contributions towards our city schools, but also towards housing, towards libraries and other community needs. The city is also investigating whether or not there could be accessory dwelling units in those large areas of single family zone property that is part of the city's makeup. So that's another area that I believe the housing office is studying at this point. We're part of a regional effort to expand housing choices because it's not just a Falls Church problem. It's a problem all around the metropolitan Washington area. So look forward to the discussion today to talk about opportunities and methods that we might take in the city to expand our opportunities to preserve affordable housing, create new housing, and other innovative techniques that will make it a more diverse and inclusive place to live here in the city. Thank you.
My God, he stayed with.
Thank you, Jim.
He stayed with them.
Let me,
That was Jim Snyder.
and let me remind everybody who's not speaking to put their microphones on mute, please. Next, we have Camilla McAfee. She is Vice President of Real Estate Development for Wesley Housing and is responsible for all aspects of the company's real estate development activities from project conception through completion. Ms. McAfee joined Wesley Housing in 2008 and previously served as Wesley Housing's Director of Real Estate Development, a development associate with Forest City, Washington and Washington, D.C., and Director of Public Finance at the District of Columbia Housing Finance Agency. Under Ms. McAfee's leadership, Wesley Housing closed and started construction on $168 million in affordable multifamily development projects in 2020. Ms. McAfee holds a BS in Finance and Small Business Management from Georgetown University and a Master of Business Administration from American University. She was also a fellow with the Center for Urban Redevelopment Excellence at the University of Pennsylvania. Camilla.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank the League and the Civic Association for their support in taking the charge of taking on this very challenging issue of affordable housing. I appreciate the recognition of affordable housing, as a right, but also as an issue to tackle, to challenge the city to tackle the issue of equity as well as diversity in the city. So I appreciate that. Also appreciate Jim's acknowledgement of affordable housing as a regional challenge, and understand the constraints and the challenges that the city may face in being, a 2.2 square mile jurisdiction and, relative to the region, and trying to figure out that role. So appreciate and looking forward to the conversation to talk about that a little further. Just to give some background about Wesley, for those of you that do not know, we're a 46-year-old nonprofit affordable housing developer born out of the social justice initiatives of the Methodist Church in the 70s. Started by a former school teacher who didn't know anything about affordable housing development, but took on that challenge forward thinking and built the organization that we're a part of today. We currently have about 400 units under construction, all affordable housing units under construction. We have delivered over 500 units in the last 4 years, both preservation and production units. And we have another 270 plus units that are funded with affordable housing resources and entitled through the zoning processes in the greater region. So in the District of Columbia, City of Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, and the City of Manassas, as well as we are a partner in the development of the fields currently. Just to talk a little bit about some of the things it takes to go through the real estate development cycle on a affordable housing project. First and foremost, it takes a lot of patience. I would say that the development cycle for these properties is on average, probably 5 to 7 years, depending on the construct. So, whereas a market rate development certainly has to go through the similar processes in terms of entitlements and financing and so forth, the culmination of the types of resources that we have to put together, both federal, state, and local resources, often takes some time to build up the capital stack necessary in order to preserve and produce affordable units. That's not to say that the the requirements are the same, right? The building and design requirements as we go through entitlements are the same as market rate developers. That's an area where certain jurisdictions are taking a look at, ways to promote in terms of the regulatory processes and or any financial relief that they can give in promotion of affordable housing development. Wesley also provides, as well as many of our other nonprofit and for-profit partners in affordable housing, provide a lot of support services for our residents. Oftentimes, at least at a minimum, we provide a lot of eviction prevention services and what we call our housing stability program, which was fully put to task during COVID, of course, and during this pandemic. But we've been able to help and support our residents in accessing the federal resources that were available to help with eviction prevention and really make sure that those folks that, as we near this cliff of, people might be familiar, there's an eviction moratorium right now, thankfully, so residents aren't being evicted, but there are many that may be facing a cliff of past due payments for those landlords that weren't supporting their residents in that way. In addition, we do a multitude of other kinds of support services for our residents, including health and wellness programming, financial literacy, civic engagement and empowerment, voter rights educations, and so forth that support a lot of our residents. As I mentioned, we are a partner in the fields, and I know we're going to have some robust discussion probably as we go to the moderated session about some of those tools that we may be able to consider and access in order to preserve the fields. But I will say that, Wesley, of course, as a, with our mission being affordable housing preservation and production, our intent on making sure that we do everything we can to ensure the preservation at a minimum of the fields. That regional problem of affordable housing, the crisis that we're facing in the sense that regionally, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments a couple of years ago projected that we need some 320,000 new units of affordable housing to be able to maintain housing affordability and economic viability of the region. And every single jurisdiction is figuring out the ways and tools that they are going to put in place to support that. I know the city had established their affordable living policy a number of years ago and are taking a relook at that to figure out how many units need to be preserved and produced. But that preservation, that idea of no net loss of the existing, is imperative to meeting those future goals. So I'll close there and look forward to, again, more of the moderated discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla. Next, we have Jonathan Knopf, who is Vice President at HD Advisors, where he directs their research and program efforts across the Commonwealth. This work includes regional and local housing needs assessments, policy generation and implementation, and communication strategies. He specializes in telling stories about Virginia's housing challenges through data and regularly presents at conferences, events throughout the state. Jonathan has a master's in urban and regional planning from Virginia Commonwealth University, where he also teaches an introductory urban planning course. Jonathan.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Allison and Hal and all the other folks that have helped organize this series of forums. I think it's really critical that communities like Falls Church and everywhere else in Virginia have conversations like this about housing, and I'll get into why I think these are really important, and I hope this model works well, and I'd like to brag about you guys as we do work across the state. So long story short, I'd like to cover 5 things that I think are really critical for folks on the ground to know about the broader context of affordable housing funding and policy right now in the middle of 2021. So number one, as you all probably know, there's been an unprecedented level of funding and dollars and resources coming from the federal government for housing because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And most of that, if not all of it so far, has really taken the shape of emergency assistance through rent assistance, mortgage assistance, utility, weatherization, all sorts of stuff to help make sure people remain in their homes. And the level of that funding demonstrates how important housing is to the fabric of our society and our economy. Now, also at the federal level, there's a lot of unknowns at this point. The infrastructure bill, is housing going to be included in that? There are also some other bills proposed in Congress to greatly expand the low-income housing tax credit, which we can talk about as the primary producer of affordable housing in the country. So there's a lot of momentum at the federal level for resources in housing. Number two, we have kind of the same story at the state level. Even before the pandemic, we had historic investments in our state housing trust fund. We now have an unexpected surplus in our state budget that lawmakers are going to consider next month. We have the over $4 billion in state aid that the American Rescue Plan has brought in. Secretary Ball, the Secretary of Commerce and Trade for the state, has proposed $500 billion of that to go to housing over the next 3 years. We also have proceeds coming in from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We brought in over $20 million in our first auction earlier this year, and a large amount of that is going to go to DHCD to pass through as energy efficiency measures in affordable housing across the state. And we also have a new state tax credit program, the Virginia Opportunity Housing Credit, to supplement the federal LIHTC program. That's just rolling out this year. And so there's a lot happening at the state level in terms of funding and resources. Number three, state policymakers also have a higher level of saliency when it comes to housing policy and programs. We're helping them undertake a statewide housing needs assessment and review of existing state housing programs. That report was started by House Bill 854 back in the 2020 session. The results of that, I'm happy to go into in more detail, or at least the process of it, but the results will be available later this fall. There's also an ADU study on accessory dwelling units that DHCD and the state is leading that will also wrap up this fall. And JLARC is also undertaking a review of local land use restrictions and how they relate to affordable housing. So JLARC for the first time is looking at affordable housing in a really holistic way, and it'll be very interesting to see the results of their work. Number four, I think what's important to take away from a lot of this is that this all means that localities must act around housing if they want to put their money in actions where their mouth is when it comes to supporting affordable housing and supporting more diverse housing options at the local level. This means reckoning with land use and exclusionary land use, which can prevent the delivery and creation of affordable housing. This means creating more flexible and robust local funding streams for housing. And it frankly means coming to grips with NIMBYism and local opposition to housing, and especially housing for low-income persons. And so my fifth and final point is that everything that's been happening over the past 12 to 18 months, all of this really impressive momentum and fire hose of resources is necessary, but not sufficient to meet the housing needs that we have in the Commonwealth. We can talk more about needs. I've got plenty of data. I think everybody does. But it took many decades, if not a century, to get to the point of it and the scale of challenges we have today. And so it's going to take a concerted level of funding and resources that we're beginning to see now. Finally, unfortunately, it took a pandemic to get there. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of investment if we're actually going to solve these challenges. And so my final message is all of this emergency investment emergency action is not long-term investment in housing, and we need to sustain and continue this policy work and these resources if we want to make progress.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Jonathan mentioned NIMBYism, and what that is not in my backyard, and that speaks to folks who are supportive of a concept as long as it's not within their own community. So next, let's turn to Betsy Faga. Betsy retired as president of the North American Millers Association in 2010. She spent 40 years working with the wheat, corn, oat, and rye milling industry. She represented the association before the administration and Congress, developed research activities, and traveled extensively overseas in connection with the industry's participation in food assistance programs. Betsy is actively engaged in a number of volunteer activities, including chair of her church's project to rebuild the church along with an apartment building for affordable housing, serving on the Alexandria Housing Affordability Advisory Committee, acting as a counselor at an emergency financial ministry, and volunteering at a homeless shelter. She continues to travel internationally for pleasure. Betsy is originally from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and graduated from Millersville University. Go ahead, and Betsy, and take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Nancy. And like the other panelists, it's delightful to be joining you for this discussion. And I guess of the other panelists, I'm not the only one who doesn't live in Falls Church, but delighted to be able to bring some perspective from what I would call the layperson. As was indicated, I think the most prominent experience I have is working with my church over an 8-year period. It didn't take that long to do the construction, but the process was that long to decide that we wanted to demolish our current church, and we're called to build affordable housing and work with partners to develop 113 units and have a new church. And all of that was available to move into in the March and April timeframes. So we are becoming accustomed to our new environment. And I've been asked to particularly make some comments about advocacy and how to address NIMBY concerns that Nancy just mentioned. I'm certainly a strong proponent of bringing people together to advocate for a specific issue. Throughout my career, since I did a lot of that work with the administration and with Congress, it feels quite natural to do that. From my experience with our project, we collaborated with 2 different organizations. Voice, which is Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement, and NVAHA, which is the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. NVAHA is a coalition of industry professionals engaged in working together, and I know Wesley is a member, as are many other developers and financial people. Voice is a coalition of both faith communities and civic organizations that work together to build power in middle and low income communities. And I think what is interesting about their approach is that we feel it's critical for all parties to be at the table. So engaging people who live in affordable housing is an important component of it, and empowering them to feel as though they can have some say in this whole issue. Our engagement has taken a number of different forms. It started in our case with getting to know members of city council and state legislators and meeting with them to familiarize them with affordable housing, with real life stories from those who live there, and often doing it when you're not asking for something, but just wanting them to know what you're doing. It has involved writing letters on specific issues to decision makers. And it has involved appearing at Planning Commission and City Council meeting, both organizations that I know all of you are quite familiar with and probably have worked with yourselves. And I certainly saw the impact of speaking before both groups, encouraging city funding in our case for our project so that we could move forward with it. And we went to those meetings with coalition members. Not everybody needed to speak, but when those people who did speak asked those who were supporting them and that were in the room to stand up, to have 50 people behind you stand up and say, I'm here in support of what this person is saying, makes a difference and does have an impact. New construction, as we know, always raises concerns about design, density, green space, and other factors. And there will be always residents who, as Nancy explained, support affordable housing, but don't want it in their neighborhood. I do believe that the renewed attention this past year to equity provides a wonderful opportunity with the opportunity that Jonathan was mentioning about funds being available. As an example, this year, Alexandria adopted a resolution committing itself to racial and social equity. And it states, equity means promoting just and fair inclusion throughout our city and creating the conditions in which everyone can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. In my opinion, if you believe in equity, which I know so many people in this Northern Virginia area do, and certainly throughout the country, you have to believe in affordable housing. To address NIMBYism, though, concerns need to be heard. In some cases, design plans can be modified to address some of the concerns, but it's also important for residents to be aware that design elements, traffic, density, all are within the guidelines of the city. There is no developer who is going to preserve or who is going to do a new development that isn't going to follow the allowable guidelines. And interestingly enough, with our own project, some of the neighbors who opposed it are now asking how they can welcome and interact with the residents who will soon be their new neighbors. So attitudes do change, and I look forward also to the conversation that will follow the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Betsy. So our final panelist today is Joshua Shakur. Joshua joined the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities in 2020, focusing on issues associated with housing, finance, policy, and programs, and as the low income housing tax credit and rental assistance demonstration. Prior to his arrival, Josh worked at the NHP Foundation, where much of his work concentrated on analyzing the social impact of affordable housing, resident service engagement, and researching equitable housing solutions through housing finance policy, housing subsidy programs, and both public and private housing initiatives. Joshua also spent time as an intern with the City of Falls Church, developing strategies related to addressing the lack of affordable housing in the city. He is actively involved in his local community, serving as the chair of the Falls Church Housing Commission, and an author of the Affordable Living Policy, and as a former city council candidate. Josh holds a Master of Public Policy from George Mason University, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Social Anthropology from George Mason University. So Josh.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Legal Women Voters and CBC, for inviting me here to discuss about this important issue. And I appreciate all the other panelists. I think they covered a lot of things, whether it's zoning issues in the city, what's going on at state level, national level in terms of funding. Having a developer of the only standalone affordable project in the city is important. And then Betsy with discussing advocacy and NIMBYism. I first want to say that I think now is the time to tackle this issue about affordable housing. The tides are changing in the city, and it seems to be more YIMBYism I've been running into than NIMBYism. So again, I appreciate putting on this forum and inviting me for the third time. So I grew up in the city, and I believe my life outcomes were increased greatly by growing up in this community. And my goal has been to have others have the same opportunities that I was provided. But while Falls Church is annually ranked as one of the wealthiest and healthiest communities in the nation, our lowest scores in those healthiest communities rankings are in housing, diversity, and equity. And this goes along with part of the reasons why I ran for city council last year. But I've always been passionate about income and wealth inequality and racial inequities. But my true passion for affordable housing began when I started an internship in the City of Falls Church. And then observing the Housing Commission and what they did. I joined the Housing Commission about 3 years ago, and now very happy to be the chair and leading the commission. But the work that they did to inform the decision makings and the advocacy in the city towards affordable housing was something that I really admired, and I was glad to have the opportunity to be a part of that. Also, I was worked as an author of the affordable living policy, where we finally got the opportunity to make ADUs, which have been expiring over the past few years and are looking to expire going forward. We were able to make them be affordable for the life of the building for in perpetuity. So that seems to have started once the affordable living policy passed, and we made it so that affordable ADUs would be affordable for perpetuity. A tide started changing, and working along with other city council members and building a coalition, we started actually making change. And over the past year, for the first time, the Affordable Housing Fund, or maybe first time, or it's been a long time, if ever, the Affordable Housing Fund was funded through the budget. We've been acquiring properties in Virginia Village as of recent to maintain their affordability, but also look for a bigger project in the future. The housing staff with HHS has been able to secure Amazon Reach grants to buy down rents of expiring ADUs for at least 10 years, and also begin a whole affordable home ownership program. And I would say the biggest accomplishment that I've been pushing for years was to increase the percentage of ADUs through voluntary concessions at new mixed-use developments. For about the last 20 years, it's pretty much been a trend that we've been just doing 6%, and that's been the status quo. So I was very happy that through coalition building, we were able to raise that number to 10% ADUs. I personally believe ADUs are the best way, easiest, fastest mechanism for creating affordable housing in the city of Falls Church. 2.2 square miles, property is difficult to come by. And you do run into some pushback through very different commissions and boards, other people on city council, and NIMBYism in the city. So ADUs, affordable dwelling units, increasing them at different properties is the easiest way to create affordable housing. And now they won't expire, whereas LIHTC does have expirations, as you're seeing with the fields. It also might be the most equitable method. I think that building standalone affordable housing can have detrimental impacts on identity within the city. And I believe it is better than a standalone project, because if you want to be a more diverse and welcoming city, which we have a vision for 2040, we should do it the right way. We have to remember that we're talking about people, families, children. They're more than just units and percentage points on a census. We should strive to preserve the affordable units we have and create many more than just offsetting the ones we have lost, but it should be done with the goal of redressing past injustices, discriminatory practices, while increasing life outcomes. And it shouldn't be done for the sake of tokenism or to check a box or just to increase units in general. It should be done the right way. So finally, I just want to give a sneak peek on basically what we are looking to do in the future over the next year and going forward on the Housing Commission. Our main advocacy is going to be around more inclusionary zoning policies, trying to get a dedicated funding stream for the Affordable Housing Fund. While I know it's going to be difficult coming out of COVID, I think it's best to start having a plan and strategize on that. Continue to increase the ADU percentage and the number of lower AMI units, building a plan for the potential Virginia Village site that will have to have an affordability component, and then preserving the existing affordable units at the fields, which are about 96 units of affordable housing, which is the largest chunk of, I'd say, diversity in the city, and then also preserving the expiring ADUs. So that's our plan, and I'm looking forward to the moderated questions.
Thank you, Josh. Okay, I do have some questions for the panelists. And so let's get started. My first question is, what strategies can the City of Falls Church use to increase economic and racial diversity? And for this one, let's start with Jonathan. Do you have any comments for us on that issue?
Sure. Well, I think Josh mentioned really important one, which is a dedicated source of revenue for the trust fund. That's something that down here in Richmond, we were just now able to get, even though I think many advocates and folks would call it insufficient. It's kind of a weird way that we're funding it that I won't get into, but it's progress. I think another thing that just in terms of creating resources and generating resources to supplement what is hopefully going to be generated at the federal and state levels is look into housing bonds. I'm not familiar with the bonding capacity of the city or what the city may have used general obligation bonds for in the past. That's something that's not very common in Virginia, but floating bonds for affordable housing is something that is gaining a lot of traction in other places where you think it wouldn't, including Charlotte and Raleigh, who have issued very large bonds recently that were approved overwhelmingly by voters to support affordable housing development and affordable housing preservation. And so I think Charlottesville, Fairfax, and Alexandria have in the past 20 years done something around municipal bonds for housing. It is legal for localities to do this in Virginia. Generally, localities have used bonds for other things, particularly schools, other public infrastructure. But I think now is the time for localities to think about other innovative ways to finance housing and to leverage their ability to raise funds and create resources. And Falls Church could be a leader in that space if they wanted to, because there is a vacuum for innovation in that space in Virginia. So bonds for housing is the first thing that I'll throw out.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me go next to Camilla. Do you have any strategies to increase economic and racial diversity in the City of Falls Church?
Well, as a developer, I would be remiss if I didn't piggyback off of Jonathan and Joshua's comments about the financial resources that are necessary. Certainly in every jurisdiction, in addition to that federal low-income housing tax credit, where we're producing affordable housing, there's some local funding component. The ability to access tax-exempt bonds issued by the locality as well give us access to lower cost, first mortgage capital, and that's going to be increasingly important as we likely enter a higher interest rate environment. But I'd like to also just flip it to, in terms of access and diversity, to the ability for overall community engagement, right? I think we've seen some unprecedented levels of community involvement in entitlement processes and other, planning efforts in localities through this virtual forum. It's provided, where folks do have access, digital access, which is just as important, making sure they have access to digital forums. We've seen more folks come out that are in support. So we talked about the NIMBYs and the YIMBYs. We're seeing a lot more YIMBYs involved in, when you don't have to arrange for childcare in the evenings to attend a city council meeting, and you don't have to arrange for transportation. So you're seeing a more diverse group of people having their voices being heard. The other area that I think the city can influence, of course, is in their priorities, right? Making sure that in addition to those lower AMI levels and targeting income levels, also the housing type, right? Family size units, more 2 and 3 bedrooms. The state promotes a lot of housing, prioritizing their funding streams based on the housing type, larger bedroom sizes in order to accommodate families, which ends up influencing economic and ethnic diversity. So there's just a few ideas.
Thank you. Jim, what strategies do you think the city can use to increase economic and racial diversity?
Well, I think there are several. I think, first of all, preserving the housing that you have that is market rate affordable. Older housing has a lower basis. I mean, the buildings are already there. You don't have to get permission to develop them in the first place. You will need to renovate them, keep them up to date, et cetera. But I think there are strategies from a policy point of view where you can say as a community that we don't want to redevelop these areas. We want to preserve them and enhance them. And in fact, the Virginia Village area is one of those examples where in our small area plan approved 7 years ago by the City Council and the Planning Commission, Virginia Village, which was planned for more extensive redevelopment, the small area plan called out an approach to preserve the housing was there, collect the developable units, and over time develop a mixture of community space and new affordable units. So it's been 7 years, but we're beginning to actually take small steps in that direction. Arlington County has developed over a number of years, and I used to work in Arlington, as you mentioned, special affordable housing districts where on the comprehensive plan, you outline areas and say, we want to preserve these areas, and we will provide additional incentives within the zoning ordinance to permit possibly additional density or more flexibility if you develop affordable units, but you take the map and you designate it. So I think they've done about 3 generations of affordable housing designations on their comprehensive plan, their land use plan. City Council and Planning Commission, Housing Commissions have the ability to do that under Virginia planning legislation. Also, the thing I've heard, if you can listen to developers talk honestly and forthrightly, it's hard for them to say this in public hearings, but the incredibly slow process of entitlement makes it very hard to produce the percentage of units that people would like to have that are affordable. Zoning lawyers cost $800 to $1,000 an hour. Think about that. I mean, they would tell you we could do more if we could get through the process more quickly. The other thing I've heard complaints about are that many of the well-meaning programs that government develops or others develop are so hard to use that they aren't practical in terms of how they can actually be used by financing that is needed to build these projects. You know, they go to banks, they go to partners who have money, and they have to be able to work with these systems. Sometimes systems that are set up to help are so hard to use, so full of protections that they never get used. So, I mean, those are bigger problems, but I'd be interested to hear what the folks at Wesley have to say about that. I do think the housing bond idea is a great idea. This is the cheapest money you're going to have in a generation. When I bought my house in 1976 in a area of Alexandria called Del Rey, and it was a community development block grant target neighborhood at the time, you know, the interest rates were 8.75%, and you felt lucky to get that. And the city had a program where they did home renovations at like 6% through, you know, First Virginia Bank, one of the banks. So think about what you have now. I mean, these percentages are historically low, and to not take advantage of them to build housing infrastructure and other things is nuts. So those are some of my thoughts. I do think we should use the tools we have, say the areas we want to preserve and enhance. Even the fields, for example, we own a street in the middle of the fields. Could we vacate that street, add extra density, change the zoning ordinance to not discriminate against units per acre, which it does presently? You know, you can change these rules. We make the rules, and you're allowed to make the rules in Virginia through the planning legislation, the authority of the City Council and the Planning Commission. So that's, you know, a little bit random, but I think there are tools available. You also have to have real commitment that we want to actually do this and make change, and it takes leadership. There will always be people opposed to things. I recall how hard it was to get group homes done in Arlington by the First Street. You had to have a special permit. You'd think you were trying to put a nuclear power plant in neighborhoods. County board approved them anyway. They got approved. A year or two later, people were happy to have them there. Betsy, that's an example of what you may have run into. But it takes leadership. There's a lot of resistance to change. And leadership in the proper direction that is positive, I think, is crucial.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Now, Josh, you talked about this subject in your opening remarks. Do you have do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I actually have a lot. So again, development is one way of doing it, right? I think it's the easiest thing. It's the easiest thing our minds go to. Let's just create affordable housing to create access. But there's so many more ways to do it. Or for one, let's just say that. So you can preserve and increase affordable housing, allowing more access to people of lower incomes. Have more diversified housing types. That goes with the zoning. Again, push for more lower AMI units on these ADUs. Work with Fairfax Redevelopment Authority on trying to secure more money and build, acquire land and build more housing, and maybe push more allowing of housing subsidies like housing choice vouchers. Work on advocacy and general coalition building within the community on education and to allow for more welcoming community when it comes to policies. Recruit more diversified members to boards and commissions. And again, to hold office on city council. Build a racial equity commission. Have a commission that actually looks at other policies that are coming through boards and commissions with a racial equity lens. To ensure that it's being done the right way and these opportunities are being created and we aren't just insulating our city still. And I would say first-time home buyer assistance programs, allow for down payments, entry to having equity, building wealth in the city, not just allowing them to come through, allowing people to come move here through rental apartments. There's a lot of different things that can be done. And I think, again, the easiest thing is sometimes our minds just shut off when it comes to just building housing. We have to, the system, it's called systemic racism for a reason, because it's ingrained throughout the whole system. We need to look at how to redress that and unravel these tangles that are already put there and intentionally untangle them as they were intentionally put there in place.
Thank you. And finally, Betsy, can you suggest some strategies to increase economic and racial diversity?
Well, I think Camilla was touching on it, where you really go in, and I think all of us are talking about the advocacy side of it, which is, the area that I know most. And I think it is educating both council, commission members, and residents. And the part that Camilla was addressing, which I think is really important, is allowing communities to be a part of the conversation. I hate to use Alexandria as the example all the time, but that's what I'm familiar with. And on the American Rescue Funds that are coming out, they had meetings, and as we're saying, virtual, it makes it so much easier. They had meetings and a survey saying, how would you spend this money? And I think people are always there's much more buy-in when you have people involved in the conversation and have, all people involved.
Okay, thank you. Now for this next question, I think I'll start with Josh. And Josh, in the past, committed affordable housing was focused on households making 60 to 80% of the area median income. Should Falls Church prioritize housing for lower income households versus moderate income? And can you suggest what the pros and cons would be? And how does the current policy to give priority to residents impact diversity? That's several questions in one. So
Yeah.
however you want to look at it.
So I think, again, what's your goal for, you have to figure out what is your goal for creating affordable housing. Is it to increase diversity, or is it to just increase the affordable housing? By lowering the AMI, you're going to receive, if it's voluntary concessions or in general building development, you're going to get less units for the amount of money you're getting. So, if it's a higher AMI, you'll get maybe, say if it's 10%, you get 300 or 30 units. If it's lower AMI, you'll get maybe 15 units. So that's the trade-off. I think that we should prioritize people with lower income and make that trade-off. I think that it brings more diversity in terms of income, and it allows for a lot of people who work in the city who just work here and commute in and out to actually potentially live here. And I think that's important, that people can live where they work. And then the other question was, what was the last part? You're on mute, Nancy.
Sorry about that. Thank you. That's the mantra for the last year. You're on mute. So the last part of the question is the current policy that the City of Falls Church has for their affordable housing is to give priority to residents. But how does that impact diversity? Should there be change? Okay.
I think we were discussing that at a couple of housing commission meetings ago, and I can't remember where we fell. And I think there was a reason why it might not be possible. I can't remember exactly, but I think many of us believe that we should allow for again, maybe getting rid of prioritizations or first come first serve, rather than just allowing for people in the city to get extra priorities to get affordable housing. And I think that you would be able to increase more diversity in the city economically and racially by getting rid of the priorities, the schedule of priorities in general. So there's no point system or anything. I think that would be the main goal, but I can't remember exactly the figures off the top of my head about the number of people we actually see coming into the city to apply for ADUs, and how many of them are actually in the city and how many of them are not in the city. So I can't remember that number, but again, it's something that we should look at potentially doing.
Thank you. Thank you. So Jim, let me ask you the same question, where what are your thoughts about prioritizing the lower income households versus the current priorities for the more moderate income households, and if you can think of pros and cons?
Well, I think you need to do both, frankly. I mean, you've got a narrow bandwidth of how many units you're actually providing. We have a lot of people who work in the city, and those jobs don't allow you to live in the city. And that includes a lot of city employees. One of the biggest costs for families or individuals is the price of a car. If you have to drive and to get to work, that's a big chunk of your income. And I think a lot of service workers in particular, that's become a huge part of, it becomes an obstacle to working, and it becomes a huge part of their expenses. So I think you frankly need to do both. Again, I think there are city employees, a lot of them who would not meet those income ranges you talked about earlier. I think, what were they, 88 to 100 and,
yeah, 60 to 80%.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't meet that standard. I think another thing that's going on is just the size of houses that are being built. I mean, we have a Falls Church, if you look back, there are a lot of houses that were modest houses, and they were modestly priced in their day, and those are the ones that are being torn down and thrown away and replaced by very large multi-bedroom, multi-bathroom pro forma in 3 dimensions that the bank will approve. And so, I think there are other ways you could redevelop some of those. I think there are about 1,000 units last time I counted that were older homes where the land and building values are, the land's worth more than the house. So, the notion that the city has had about, could you do accessory dwelling units? Well, why can't you fix up that house and put another small house in the back and have 2 units that are more affordable than an unaffordable, monster house that has to get built to make the bank loan work? I mean, it's also less wasteful. Ironically, Nancy, years ago, there was a lot of concern about the condominium conversion of older garden apartments. And yet, if you look at places in the Northern Virginia region where older garden apartments were converted to condominium, and there's some in the city, those are some of the more affordable homeowner opportunities in the region, because the units are small and they weren't oversized. They don't have a gigantic amount of amenities. So in Alexandria and Arlington, Falls Church, and other places, some of the conversions of older garden apartments are actually some of the more affordable homeowner opportunities. Winter Hill is an example. And in some cases, when that happened, affordable housing developers were able to take chunks of those projects and keep them as even more moderately affordable. The other thing I would say is we have other housing needs. There's special populations that need housing. We worked really hard. I thought it would take no time at all, but the Miller House, for example, which was a piece of property the city owned, was zone transitional, was sold to eventually a group that is built a group home, but it took a lot of time and a lot of money. And why couldn't you have special housing built into some of these mixed use projects where you can help other special populations? Some of the elderly, there are lots of groups of folks who need help, and housing is kind of basic. So I think a broader approach is even more inclusive, and you need a higher percentage that argues for less process and more funding. I mean, I think ultimately, if the community really cares about housing, just like if you really care about open space, take some of your tax base and you would obligate a certain amount of it toward that. That you've got to do it with the support of your community. But I think people knew that the pennies on the tax base were actually going to do something like purchase open space or preserve affordable housing. If there was a real visible, tangible, transparent connection, I think more people would support it. At any rate, I'm getting out of my depth. I'm not the budget guy, I'm the planning guy, but those are some thoughts. I will say, I watched Arlington in my 30 plus years over there, and the community had rejected public housing authority. But nonetheless, because there was such interest in doing a better job, groups like Wesley and Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing and others, in many cases working with partners who own big properties like the Buckingham area or Colonial Village where Mobile owned things. They found ways to create affordable housing. And a lot of it was done through land use and zoning techniques. But even though officially the county had rejected, the traditional way at the time of a public housing authority, there was community interest in making something happen. So the project that was mentioned earlier that's under construction, by Wesley, that's a fantastic project that'll be, built and occupied and around for another 50 years at a minimum. So I'm optimistic, but those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Okay, for this next question, I think I'll start with Camilla. And the city may be receiving some federal and state funding to support about affordable housing. There may be Amazon funds that could be coming in. So what would your suggestions be for the use of these funds with respect to housing?
Well, it would be to leverage those funds. I think most of those resources require some level of locality match or commitment, or at least in some regard. So, utilizing those funds for preservation of projects such as the fields, of course, or production of new in conjunction with all the land use tools that Jim was referencing that could be added and changed in order to support the production of affordable housing in those areas of the 2.2 square miles that could use production would be the way. It's, you want to make sure that you don't lose the opportunity to be able to take advantage of some of those funds in order to for this locality versus others. Obviously, some of those statewide funds are being sought after by other jurisdictions in Northern Virginia and beyond. So, you know, again, they require some level of local support and commitment for affordable housing preservation and production.
Okay, now let me ask Jonathan, let me ask you the same questions. What would be your suggestions for the use of a potential infusion of funds for housing?
I agree with everything Camilla said, and really the only other thing that I think is critical about both the funding coming in through the American Rescue Plan to the state and directly to localities. I think you all said when we chatted real quick on Friday that Falls Church is getting 18 million in 2 different tranches, and I'd be interested to hear if anybody knows whether the city council has talked about those funds yet and prioritization for it. But I think the one thing that's important for me is to make sure that local officials don't try to push all of that money out of the door within 12 months. Projects take a long time to come together. They take a long time to get the permitting and approvals done. They take a long time to plan. They take a long time to fall in sync with the tax credit cycles and other funding sources that need to be aligned to make it happen. So I would just encourage the locality to be very flexible with those dollars. At least for the ARP money, I think the clock runs out on that in 2025 or maybe 24. So we have time to use that money, and locality shouldn't feel a rush to try to get it out, because then I would be afraid that it would be used for things that really don't make a difference or aren't being leveraged or not being as impactful. So we have a lot of money coming down the pipe, but let's take a deep breath and plan how to use it effectively and make sure that it's done in conjunction with all of the other resources and funds that are also out there and also getting created.
I'm sorry, Nancy, I had one other thought to add.
Sure.
That came to my head as Jonathan was thinking. It's not meant to counter anything he said about the patience of the money in order to be able to be utilized for deals. But it's perhaps a portion of that fund could be used for acquisition. Land is king, especially in a jurisdiction that's only 2.2 square miles. And so, you know, if the city had the opportunity and the bandwidth and the wherewithal to be able to acquire sites, you know, quickly, that would be another opportunity to be able to utilize that funding.
Totally agree.
Okay. And Josh, what are your thoughts for the potential use of this potential infusion of funds?
Yeah, as I agree with Camilla and Jonathan. One, don't make a quick knee-jerk reaction and start using the money up. Be smart and be very intentional with the use of it and thinking the future of how best it can support the goals of Falls Church. But I think I totally agree with Camilla as well. I think that's been a big problem recently, is that land will come up and we can't act quickly to acquire it. And I think that happened recently, early this year or late last year, when we were looking at potentially doing a smaller affordable housing project potentially. So I think having use of some of that funds to use for acquisitions, it's another issue we've been having with Virginia Village and trying to figure out the whole mechanisms of purchasing and acquiring those properties. So I think those are the good thoughts right now. And then we can figure out, again, if we acquire properties, we can have plenty of time to figure out what we want to do with those projects. So I think that's probably the smartest decision. Sorry.
Thank you. It looks like, Jim, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on what Camilla said. You got to have site control or some access to sites. And getting it later rather than sooner is always more expensive. So, are there possibilities of options? We missed opportunities in the previous 7 years, as you know, Nancy, to nail down some properties in Virginia Village because there wasn't support to do it and there wasn't any money to go acquire it. But there may be people, for example, who are interested in selling a piece of property someday, and maybe you could purchase an option and give them time, if you're in the long game, which cities and communities are, You can say, we really would like to have this property for future affordable housing. And we'd like to have right of first refusal and put money down and have an option. And then you've bought some time. But if you don't have any site control, you also could, you can defer taxes that could help your purchase price. And they're just tools you have, but you've got to have some site control, I think. The other thing I'll mention is different communities are approaching things differently. With the big hit that took place for commercial retail properties, you can look at parts of communities that have vacant properties now, older commercial areas that are seas of parking lots. They've got an old building somebody's trying to reuse, and they're not allowed to put housing on them. And yet these have water, sewer, power, transit, the wasted opportunity to not develop housing on main roads that have everything going for them. I mean, it's just nuts, in my opinion. And you can see the change in one jurisdiction from another, where one jurisdiction has a new Harris Teeter and housing and other kinds of uses. And then you go next door and it's a big parking lot and very low density old retail that's struggling to survive. So, and a lot of these things are hard to do because of state rules. VDOT, for example, seems to be in charge of land use in many cases in the state. And there's this worry about, well, density will cause more traffic. Well, I think it's more important for us to think about where people live and trying to have people live more close to their jobs and their livelihoods than to worry about whether you may not need another car if you could catch a good bus, and you might be able to have better bus ridership if you have more people living on the bus line.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Betsy, you have some comments to make about this?
I just wanted to go back also and emphasize, I don't want to repeat a lot, but both Camilla and Jim talked about leveraging dollars. And I think any jurisdiction needs to be ready to put some of their own money into it. And I know taxes are always a scary thing, but our advocacy coalition worked on supporting the meals tax. And, everybody was so worried. Restaurants said people won't come into our restaurant, and they won't come to the city because they can go someplace else where they don't have a meals tax. And I mean, it was so infinitesimal. I don't think anybody notices it in any restaurant bill that they get. And, it has raised, I'm going to say $5 million a year, but I may be really off on that, but significant amount of money where, again, there was concern that is shared beforehand and then seems to go away once decisions are made. So I think those kinds of things are worth pushing for.
Okay, thank you. I know I do have more questions that I could be asking, because this is such a rich topic as we look for the future of affordable housing. But I do want to turn it over to Allison in case there are questions from people who are viewing. So Allison.
Sure, if you have questions, put them in the chat, but so far we haven't had any questions in the chat, so.
Okay, if that's the case, then I'll go ahead and continue to speak to our panelists. But if anybody who is watching would like to ask a question of the panelists, please do put them in the chat. We have until 5:30, so we have about another 15 minutes. So if you think of something as they're speaking, go ahead and put it in. And Allison, feel free to interrupt as we go along so that we can be sure to answer those questions. So the next question I have is about zoning. And so we know that zoning has had a huge impact on housing and affordable housing, and the zoning came back through, there was kind of a checkered past having to do with zoning. So the question I have is what are the implications of adjusting zoning to encourage affordable housing to include, for example, allowing duplexes or other multifamily housing in neighborhoods zoned for single family housing? And what is the plausibility of doing this? So for this question, let me start with Betsy. See if you have any thoughts on this particular issue.
I feel that's probably in the bailiwick of Jim and those who work in zoning, but I would say it certainly is possible to do, and I think it's important to do. It does raise, neighborhood concerns about how things will change, but just about, as a part of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, all new projects come to the committee before they go to Planning Commission and City Council. And just about every project requires some sort of zoning change. And some of them are much more modest, I think, than people would anticipate, or make more sense than people would anticipate. So I think it's an important component that needs to be pursued.
Thank you. Let me go next to Camilla. Do you have any thoughts about zoning?
Sure. In this context of loosening up zoning in single family zones, it's certainly a hot topic right now in many jurisdictions in Northern Virginia who are kind of piggybacking off of some of the studies and the early starts of folks in Minneapolis and on the West Coast with ADUs and the missing middle challenge. I know Arlington is engaged in a multi-year study on the missing middle as a typology, right? Not necessarily as an affordability, in terms of AMI levels or affordability income restriction levels. So promoting duplexes and alternative forms of housing that, historically we've seen serve the workforce in many ways. And so, I think it's certainly a good thing. I definitely think, housing affordability is at its core a supply and demand issue, right? So more supply of any level of housing affordability is good, but I think many of the folks that might challenge some of those efforts would say that, you're not going to see the lower income levels being served by some of that housing. So you build the duplex and it's still going to end up serving probably your 80 to 120 or 150% of AMI. So folks that may not be able to afford the highest level of housing in a community and still necessary of housing opportunity in a community, but it's not going to hit your below 50, certainly not below 30% of AMI. That kind of capital A affordable housing really needs to be subsidized in a different way.
Thank you.
We do have a question from the chat. The questioner wants to know, what about collaboration with Fairfax and Arlington, particularly in properties near Seven Corners? Are there opportunities there as Fairfax and Arlington look at redevelopment there for Falls Church to be involved?
And we can open this up to any panelists who would care to address that.
Let me mention the city is undertaking presently a small area plan for the Eastern Gateway area, which includes the commercial areas adjacent to Seven Corners in Fairfax County. And so there's an opportunity as part of that plan, which we are just starting off right now, to add policy goals in terms of housing. Fairfax County approved a redevelopment revitalization plan for Seven Corners that looks to revitalize shopping center, but also build a lot of additional units, like 5,000 units. So I believe in planning as a place to make some of this stuff happen, but you really need to put down goals as to what you want to achieve. It looks like there's a huge amount of money that's looks like it wants to be spent on, it's like $724 million to fix roads in Seven Corners, fix Route 7, et cetera. that's an awful lot of money to fix roads and bridges. And you wonder whether maybe some of that money wouldn't be better spent elsewhere. But there is definitely an opportunity to do something about housing. And there are opportunities in that area. So we would invite the rest of the staff and the Housing Commission and others to weigh in about objectives. And there is a very special community in the Eastern Gateway area, the Seven Corners area, Eden Center. We have a lot of amazing businesses and owners, small businesses, some of whom live in the city, but many of whom don't. So, like I said before, could there be some efforts to create housing so that people who work in the city could live in the city as well and have a more chance to use their money and their lives, would be enriched by less time on the road.
Another question from the audience. It deals with zoning. Is it fair to those who purchase single family homes with existing zoning for the city to change zoning to allow duplexes, ADUs, and other kinds of buildings? Will anybody comment on any fairness issues they see there?
Sure, I'll comment on it. I think it's fair. I will note that ordinances change. A lot of the older small homes in the city were built under, some of them were built under subdivision rules before zoning existed. So an area like Greenway Downs, which was built before zoning existed, we've been trying to fix the zoning ordinance to take that area out of what I would call zoning purgatory, where they don't meet the present standards, so it inhibits what they can do. We have other older homes that were built under a different set of setbacks, and so in some cases that perfectly fine older homes are sitting in what's supposed to be a corner yard setback. So they were negatively affected by categories of zoning details that are presently in place. I think you need more flexibility. If you have an existing home and you want it to keep it the way it is or make changes, you certainly have that ability. But I think presently some of the constraints, particularly in the single family area, are negative. And I think more options would make for a more interesting, diverse community. As we knock down every old house and all the trees, I mean, the community won't look the same. So I think change to the zoning categories are very helpful.
Thank you. Josh, it looked like you were getting ready to jump in on that one too. Is that correct?
No, I think Jim definitely summed up everything I would say.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add, I think fairness is a strange way to frame that question, because I could easily flip that frame and say, why is it fair to lock out other people of different incomes or different housing preferences out of that neighborhood through our land use? And is it fair for our local public policy to have a stated goal through single family only zoning, which Jim has described as really only encouraging large mansions when money comes to town, as opposed to redeveloping those properties into more affordable, more diverse housing options? Why should our public policy, just in general, if we are trying to preserve communities through single family zoning, why should our public policy only be about preserving the property values and the character, quote unquote, of those neighborhoods? Shouldn't our planning goals be those that are generally stated within our comprehensive plans, and those that are generally stated by elected officials, which is to encourage greater equity, encourage greater sustainability by keeping people closer to their jobs? I mean, I looked at some census data on employment trends in Falls Church right before I logged on. Only out of all of the people that are employed within the city limits, all of the different jobs, less than 5% of those workers actually live in the city. Is that a sustainable thing that the Falls Church city, or any city or county in Virginia or the country, is that a good thing to have as your status quo? And there's a lot of different things that go into that. But land use and housing and changing the zoning rules that were created, at least in Virginia, almost explicitly as a tool for racial segregation, we have to be looking at those if we want to achieve the goals that our elected officials and our broad long-range land use documents are telling us what are the values of our community.
We
One thing
only
I'd
have,
like to say-
Jim, just a second. I just want to see if, we only have 1 minute left, so I wanted to see if anybody else wanted to jump in on that question before we go to you.
I really just want to say one thing, and that is that in terms of advocacy for affordable housing or different housing types, this is where the main pushback is going to come in the city, and that's towards rezoning and duplexes and quadruplexes. It's going to be, about the look and feel and the character of the city and where it was, and that's going to be the main fight going forward, I think. But again, I amen to everything that Jonathan said and Jim.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Nancy, one thing I wanted to mention, we made a change to one of the categories and we're able to build a project on a piece of property called the Railroad Cottages. It serves, in this case, people who are older, restricted to that group. And I think it's a mistake to look at these ordinances as only, as one dimensional. You've got parents who need a smaller place to live, don't necessarily want to leave the city. You have kids coming back from college who don't have a place to go. We've got this monoculture. You need more flexibility is what I'm trying to say. So it's not all about income. It's not all about economics. It's, can we make room in our ordinance to have enough flexibility so people can do what they need to do? If you want to bring it, if you are an elderly parent or becoming one, like I'm becoming, could you have a smaller place and your kids could live next door or somebody else could be there? We just need more flexibility, period. And we'll be a better community for more flexibility. The cottages won the state of Virginia's planning award for best development last year because it was unique and it hadn't been done. And yet it's within jurisdiction's powers to do those kinds of things. So I think we need to be more imaginative. We need to be more inclusive in terms of let's help a lot of people have better places and ways to live. Because if it's too narrow of a conversation, you're going to turn off a lot of people.
Okay, I think time is up, so I'll only turn it over to Allison and Hal. Thank you all. This has been a wonderful discussion.
So everybody, I'm going to jump in. This is our last forum, the League of Women Voters and CBC. And I just have a few closing remarks. Let me ad lib and point out that there are 3 members of the City Council that are part of this meeting and 1 planning commissioner. And that has been consistent through all the forums. So I didn't necessarily say that to the panelists, but they're not preaching. They're preaching with the choir right now. I just want to express sincere thanks to today's panelists, Jim, Camilla, Jonathan, Betsy, and Josh. Lots of thumbs up. And also acknowledge with gratitude the excellent contributions of their predecessors in the first 2 forums. I think together, the panelists have helped inform and educate the people of Falls Church about the past, present, and future of affordable housing in our community. We hope that their efforts and the discussion it inspired will promote increased public interest in, understanding of, and support for significantly more affordable housing in our city that truly embraces the ideas of economic and racial diversity. Finally, I want to acknowledge and express my appreciation to the League of Women Voters and CBC planning team members who helped make the idea of a forum series a reality. Allison Brown, Ellen Salisbury, Mark Davis, Ken Feltman, and of course, Nancy Vincent. Comments or questions regarding this forum or its predecessors can be directed to Allison or myself. I'll say the emails, but you can get them otherwise. Allison1@yahoo.com and I'm hblip2@verizon.net. For everyone's further information, links to the first 2 forums are already posted on the League of Women Voters and CBC websites, and the one for today's session will be posted by tomorrow or soon thereafter. Thank you all so much for being here, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of this beautiful summer Sunday.